Hello, everyone. Welcome back to my YouTube channel where I've got recaps of episodes of Genius Game UK. We are now in episode 5, and this one is a doozy. I really liked this episode. I think now that there's fewer players, there's a bit more time to explore a lot more of the social dynamics going on between people in the cast. And this game, despite being sort of a straightforward game and how it was going to end, somehow the episode was still really intense because of all of the tension between all of us. So I'm really excited to go over this. There's also a lot that I need to talk about to help give some context to what happened. So last week in the Rob Has a Podcast recap that Corey and Zach Wertenberger did, Zach made the comment that I was collecting enemies like Infinity Stones. So that's why I've got the picture this week like this. And I think it's a really interesting thing to consider because I think it's a lot more complicated than that. And I think this episode really highlights like how complicated the social dynamics and interactions are. Because on one hand, at the beginning of the episode, these two groups form and neither group really wants to work with me. So that's obviously not a good sign in terms of my social standing in the game. But then on the other hand, as the episode plays out, I'm able to essentially convince Bedalia and Indy not to put me in the deathmatch. And so that is showing that I'm not a total pariah in the group, and that, you know, at least not everyone was really targeting me and wanting me to go in because they had a chance to put me there. And Indy could have called me in to face her. So I think it's a complicated situation. So I think there is probably some evidence that I'm going around collecting enemies like Infinity Stones. But at the same time, I'm playing this game hard, and my mouth kept me out of the deathmatch of this episode, being able to negotiate my way out of that situation. It's also really tricky because it's hard to know how much of my drop in the social standing was due to getting the undercover agent role, in the sense that no matter how I play that, am I just screwed? You know, like I think we saw with Amanfi when he got the zombie in the black cube, like obviously he played those roles to still win, and he wasn't super honest and upfront about the zombie in the black cube in the way that Charlotte was with the zombie and Ken was with the black cube. But you can see that just getting those roles and playing them as intended really hurt his social game. So it's unclear how much of my drop in social standing was due to just getting that role and playing it hard versus like picking fights with Bex. So obviously I think picking that fight with Bex last week probably wasn't the best idea. You know, if I was better at playing the social game, I would have been seething on the inside, but I wouldn't have ever confronted her, and I would have still had her convinced that I was a close ally of hers in the game and I wanted her to go far. You know, and then if I wanted to make a move against her, then I could at a later point. But the nice thing about Genius Game, unlike Survivor or Big Brother, that, you know, other people are familiar with, is that you can be a threat in Genius Game, because unless you get unlucky and get a deathmatch like Amanfi's, you have a chance to save yourself. So I felt, in terms of my strategy, especially after getting that undercover agent role, that I kind of needed to lean into the fact that I was a strong player and just basically try to avoid the deathmatch that way. You know, it was going to be hard for me to pretend like I wasn't capable of doing well in these games at that point. And I think that I'm also somebody who doesn't have a lot of patience when I feel like somebody is doing something that's hypocritical or something that I disagree with. So it was going to be impossible for me to bite my tongue last episode with Bex, because I just felt like it was so frustrating, you know, what was going on. That being said, I also have my own hypocritical moments in this episode, which we will get to. So yeah, I think we'll talk a lot about the social dynamics in this episode, because it's really starting to impact the way that the teams are forming and also who's getting picked for the deathmatch. Okay, Special announcement. I've written to everyone in our group WhatsApp chat, and everyone has said that they are on board for doing some kind of like group reunion episode / podcast for when the season is over. So the tentative plan is to basically film that prior to the final episode airing, and then we will release that on my YouTube channel right after the finale. So if you guys have questions or comments for people in the cast, please start putting those in these YouTube recaps, and I will keep track of them and start making a list of questions to ask people. So I think the idea with this is that since I've been doing these recaps every week, like I've had a chance to talk my shit and say what I want to say. So I'll try to sort of play more the role of like the moderator of the reunion and sort of direct questions to different people and make sure that everyone else has a chance to chime in and talk about what they want to talk about. But it will really help add some structure, I think, to the discussion if you guys have specific questions that I can pose to people. So I think in particular questions about maybe if you're confused about why certain things happen or things that weren't really shown in the show, those are really good things to ask people. So yeah, really excited about that. I think it'll be really cool. Okay. There was some discussion that I saw in last week's episode about how much people knew about how much I had prepared for the show. Because obviously in the zombie game, I made it very clear that I knew the strategy for that game. And then also in this episode, I made a comment during the death match, something like, oh, I've not seen the swings in black and white like be this large before. So that implies that I've seen the game before or that I've played the game before. So I just wanted to confirm at this point, the other players didn't know the extent to which I had prepared for the show. So they didn't know about my binder. They didn't know that I had religiously watched all of the Korean series and taken notes and everything, or that I had practiced a bunch of death matches ahead of time. That will become more public knowledge next week. But at this point, I think people didn't really know that. And that becomes really relevant because Charlotte has actually said since we filmed that had she known how much I had prepared, and I think she said this in her stream on Twitch last night, had she known how much I had prepared in episode 5, she would not have advised Indy to pick me for the death match. So yeah, a little bit of background insight there. So the show is obviously not doing well at all in the ratings, and it seems unfortunately really unlikely that it would get a second season at this point. I'm hoping it still does, and maybe it gets a second season on ITV2 or ITV Reality or something. But given the odds are lower at this point, given its popularity, I thought I would reveal something to you guys about something else about my preparation for the show. So in watching the Korean series, I knew that, and also the Dutch season, that there was the idea of this hidden advantage. And basically, if you won a main match, you got a clue that told you where this hidden advantage was located on the set. And so when I filmed my backstory interview, which was a couple weeks before we left to film the show, when we opened that puzzle box, there was a card, a black card that came with the puzzle box that had a G logo on it. And it was a black card that had gold, like embossed gold font on it, like gold foil. And it looked really fancy. And so I remembered that card. And I was thinking to myself, I need to do everything I can before this game starts to give myself the best chance of success. And so my idea was that I could create an advantage. And if I could make it look close enough to what that black card looked like, then maybe I could convince people that it was actually a real advantage that I was given within the game and not something that I had just created and brought from home. So this was like sort of what the card looked like. I don't think, I can't remember, but I don't think it was signed the creator. This photo comes from David Tennant's like fan page on Instagram. So the card looks something like this, but I remember it being black and this looks kind of dark blue. And I also remember that the card had a little like border around the edge of it. So this was sort of roughly what I remembered and what my inspiration was. And so I made this little like mock-up thing that had like a little like border and then the G logo. And I messaged my friends to see if somebody could help me like make this logo because I don't have the skills to do that. And my friend Johnny was super, super nice and just like immediately like drafted this geometric looking G. And to be honest, like you can see it there, like that's almost exactly what the G actually looks like from the show. So that was really cool that we actually got something so close because I think it's actually really convincing. And I was debating what the actual advantage should be. And in the end, what I decided on was that when there are 6 players remaining, this advantage is worth 6 garnets. And I was thinking basically that if I could show this to people and people knew that 6 more garnets would enter the game if I made it to the final 6, then that would dissuade them from calling me into a death match or putting me there because they would want 6,000 more pounds to go into the prize pot. Now, it's possible that this could have completely backfired and maybe people would have been like, oh my gosh, we definitely don't want this guy to get 6 garnets. Like, so we need to get rid of him earlier. Who knows? Like, maybe this was a terrible, terrible idea. But I basically, like a few days before we left, another one of my friends, Christina, I went over to her house and she had like a press. And I bought gold foil, I bought black cards, and I bought black envelopes, and I also bought this like gold wax, and I bought like a little seal, and I brought with me to my hotel room a little votive candle and some matches. So I was fully prepared, if I was allowed to do this, to like melt the wax and stamp it and have it in the envelope. And so basically I had like created this whole thing to make it look as legit as possible. But I remember when I met with the producers the day before filming aired, I sort of floated by them. I was like, oh, I made this thing and I didn't really bring it. I'm curious if you guys would have let me do it. And I actually did have the advantage with me in my hotel room, but I was just sort of floating to see what the producers would say, because what I was most scared of is that I played this thing and did it. And then after I did that, the producers would come out and be like, no, you can't do this. It's against the rules. And then everyone would know that I was this crazy schemer who'd come up with this fake advantage and it would totally out me. So I floated the idea to the producers and they were like, no, we wouldn't let you do that. Like, you can't bring something from outside and use it in the game. So I didn't end up using this on the show, but I thought it was a clever idea about how to create any advantage I could to get ahead. Also, in the rule book that they sent us prior to filming, it mentioned that there were different rooms on the set, and it said the bar, the study, and the lounge. And so I had a feeling, I just assumed that the study would involve books as decorations. And so I also was trying to make this thing that said, hint, the books are not what they seem. And then what I was going to do is tell people, oh, look, I found this hint. Or I was going to say, I don't know, like, the first person who got eliminated from the game, like they gave me this before they left. I wasn't sure how I was going to play it, but I could be like, oh yeah, this hint about the books. And then I found this envelope that contains this advantage in the books in the set. So it turned out that there were books in the study, but yeah, anyways, I never got to try this out, but thought it was an interesting idea, and it shows you just how much my head was in the game before the game even started. Okay, heading into episode 5, we just had a bit of a rest day, but the game was still taking a toll. So for me, like, I was not sleeping well. I wasn't really eating well, like eating lots. Like, I think I had lost a couple pounds by this point, honestly, just from the stress. My stomach was upset. I was getting headaches. Like, I was just really feeling the stress of the game because I did not want to get eliminated early. And actually, episode 6, I think you'll see next week, was when I just kind of started to relax a little bit. And it's a huge regret that I have, actually, because I think that you saw some moments of me being a bit lighthearted and fun in episode 1. And there was like one moment of that in this episode where it was my turn to pull the chips and I was like, give me a giraffe, baby, or like something crazy. I think had I been a little bit more relaxed, there would have been more moments like that. And I think my anxiety and stress playing the game almost like makes the viewers feel that as well, because it's so palpable, like even just watching it on TV. So if I could go back and do this whole experience again, or do some other game, like I would definitely be a lot more confident, less anxious, and I would spend more time trying to just have fun and have a good time. That being said, I signed up for this show to play a game, and my goal was to be myself, to play hard, not care how I'm being perceived, and just play hard and try to win. So, I wasn't really concerned about trying to purposely do things that would make good TV, or trying to really make sure that I came across in a positive way at all times. And I think ultimately that's kind of a good thing. Like, you don't want people in reality shows to just be really monitoring the way that they're presenting themselves. Like, you want the genuine human moments, the good and the bad. And that's what I was trying to do. I knew when I wasn't one of the first people to enter the room that morning that I might be in for an uphill battle, because it was a big advantage to go into the set earlier in the order, because you got some time to have these strategy discussions with people before other people arrived. I was really working hard to build up my relationships with the other contestants, but obviously I think some damage had been done with the Codebreakers game. And so I also think my big mistake, and you'll see it play out in this episode, was that I really spread myself too thin. And I think I took Allison and Bedalia for granted a little bit, because in my mind, they were my closest allies, and I was always intending to go really far into the game with them. I think the fight with Bex and the tension with Bex helped to kind of pull them away from me a little bit. And I also was trying to build a relationship with Indy and Charlotte. And I think I spread myself too thin. Like, I assumed that I could have this thing going with Indy and Charlotte over here, and I would also always have Bedalia and Allison in my corner over here. And what happened this episode is actually Ken swooped in and sort of took my allies from the first half of the game, and they went with him, and then I was sort of left on my own. So it sort of forced me to go with Indy and Charlotte. And I think had I not been quite as greedy about trying to build something with Indy and Charlotte, maybe I could have still stayed working with Bedalia and Allison. But then again, the tension with Bex, like Bex didn't want to work with me. So yeah, I don't know. It's really interesting. It's interesting to think how things would have come out differently had, for example, Ken taken Charlotte up on his offer to work with her. I think it was good for me in a way that Ken and Charlotte didn't team up, because they were such strong players. But at the same time, maybe it would have been better for me to still work with Bedalia and Allison and Bex, because then we would have been in the majority. I was actually convinced from very early in the game that Ken, Charlotte, and Indy had this 3-person alliance. And that turned out not to be true. That was probably the main thing that I misread from the beginning, because I think I had a good read on the other players in terms of who was going to be really strategic and cutthroat, and who was really clever and who to watch out for. But that was the one thing where I was totally off. And it came from just observing them. Like, anytime we were sitting together in the lounge, either to learn the rules about a game or to watch the death matches, it felt like the 3 of them were always sat together. And I never had any conversations with Ken, really. And so it just felt like he was more with them than with anyone else. So it honestly came as a big surprise to me in this game when Bex and Bedalia were sort of dying to work with Ken. I didn't really see that coming. That surprised me. The other thing I wanted to say, I was really happy that I made it to a point in the game where I could wear my peacock outfit, because I was hoping that was going to be my day one outfit. And so each day I was coming in and it wasn't there. And I was like, oh, why aren't they giving me my peacock shirt? Like, that's my best outfit and they're not giving it to me. And obviously I think they were saving it for this episode if I made it here because of the animal theme. So I was really glad that I finally got to wear my peacock outfit. I had this little these cute little wolf chains on my collar, but the sound people wouldn't let me wear it because they said it messed up the microphone. So I was a bit sad that I couldn't wear that on the show. Okay, this main match, Safari Race, I actually recognized it from season 4 of the Korean show. I hadn't really studied the strategy on this, like leading up to this to episode 5, because in the Korean show they used this game much earlier in the season with a lot more players. But I did remember the basic concept of the game, and I knew that it was probably going to be a good idea to be in the majority. So I think I was confused. Initially, I was really confused why Charlotte and Indy didn't want me to work with them, because it seemed like a really bad strategy to be a group of 2 when there was a group of 4 that had already formed. They didn't show it in the rules, but one of the rules of this game was that if you pick the winning animal, even if you don't win the game, you still get a garnet. So that's why Bedalia got 5 for winning. And then Charlotte and Bex each got a garnet as well because they picked the lion. And that also explains a little bit like why Charlotte was really pushing for the lion. Obviously, it helped her not get last place, but she also got a garnet as well. But one thing I want to point out, there's been some discussion online, like with the lights out game with the cubes. Some people are like, why aren't they trying to get the whites? Like they need garnets. Like the whole point of the game is to get garnets. And I was really against that idea. Like I think Allison as well was really wanting to like work together to maximize the amount of garnets that we got. But there was a reason why in all of the rule videos for the games, they never really said how many garnets we would get. I think they added some of that in afterwards. And it was because if we were not getting a lot of garnets, or if we were spending garnets on advantages, I knew that the producers were going to make the final pot whatever they wanted it to be. Like they would just change how many garnets the later games were worth if they wanted the pot to be higher or lower than what it was. So I was never concerned about trying to grow the pot. I was concerned about trying to get garnets and spend garnets to benefit myself. Like I think up until this point, I'm the only one who's actually spent a garnet on an advantage in the game. The other thing is it's weird. Like I thought it was weird that they didn't even show in this episode how many garnets people have. And I think that's because up until this point, there really wasn't a lot of benefit to having the garnets, even within the games. Like there wasn't really a lot you could do. Like I was expecting that the garnets would be much more powerful in terms of what you could spend them on in the games in order to get advantages. So yeah, you'll have to keep watching to see if that changes. Okay, in the Korean version of Safari Race, there was a trick with the chips. And so I knew that, and that is why there is a shot of me sniffing the chips. I sniffed the chip, I felt them, I bit them. I was inspecting those chips to see if there was any kind of a trick in terms of recognizing some of them, and I couldn't find it. Now, I didn't actually inspect them as much as I should have or could have, because up until episode 5, there had been no like hidden tricks or anything in the games, which is what the Korean show was kind of known for. And there were multiple times where someone on production would be like, oh no, this is season 1, like we're not doing a bunch of crazy stuff. So I had just got it in my mind that we were just playing a simple, straightforward game because it was season 1 for a new British audience and they weren't going to introduce all of these crazy tricks and twists. That being said, there was a trick with the chips. And I put the second photo down here. There's a book in the study room that has a red zebra on it. And that, I guess, was our clue that there was something different about the zebra chip. And so I heard initially, like at the wrap party, I was told by the producers that there was a hole in it. But then also I was reading on Discord from Alex, who was one of the game's producers, that there was a notch in the side. So I still don't know how the chip was actually marked. I also don't know how obvious it was because I didn't find it. And I was trying to inspect the chips. But I do know that when me and Indy and Charlotte were making our plan for what animals to pick, we all decided to pick giraffe and then one other thing. And I think I had decided to pick the crocodile. And right before I went into the dealer room, I changed my mind and picked the zebra. And I don't know why I changed my mind. I actually can't remember. I think what happened is that, and I'll talk about this in a moment, Bedalia came to us in the bar, and he told us a lot of information about what the other team was doing. Bedalia told us the 2 animals he was picking, and I think he also told us some of the animals that the rest of the team were picking. And I think at the last moment, I realized that it made sense to pick an animal that I was really confident the other team was picking, so that I would have my fate tied with them and I wouldn't end up like Indy and basically have two animals that the other team hadn't picked. So that's why I switched in the last moment. But the producers thought I had figured out the trick with the zebra chip, and that's why I had swapped to zebra. And then in the first round, when I'm pulling my chips out of the box, I remember having my hand in there for a long time because I was still at that point still trying to figure out, like, can I feel any differences with these chips? And I couldn't. So they thought I had figured it out, but I did not. So yeah, this is actually really my worst episode so far, like terrible episode for me. Like I knew this game and yet we still fucked it up and had a bad strategy. I missed the trick with the chips, like not a good episode for me. So yeah, so the way that the teams formed in this game was really interesting. And to be honest, it's a bit hard for me to still understand like exactly how it all played out because number one, people have different perceptions of how it happened. Some people's memories aren't as good as others. So even if someone tells you their perception of it, you don't know if they're remembering it correctly. Like for example, I think Bex was in the Discord last week saying that she helped Amanfi in the death match, but she didn't. Like Bex gave Amanfi the same card as everyone else. So sometimes our own memories like aren't the best at remembering the details. But according to Ken, Bedalia really wanted to work with him and had sort of told Ken at some point, I think maybe in episode 4, that he wanted to team up with Ken the next day. So that's why the two of them walked off. And then Ken said, oh, Bex, why don't you come with us? And then at that point, I think Allison went with them. I don't remember going back and forth between Ken's group and Indy and Charlotte as much as they were showing. But again, like my memory isn't the best on how this all played out. I just know that when I went into Ken's group, they basically said, we've got a strategy for 4 people and we've already got our 4. And when I went to Indy and Charlotte, they said they had a 2. And so, eventually I just went back to Indy and Charlotte and I was like, will you guys please work with me? It's interesting trying to get a sense of how this all played out because this was actually a monumental shift in the dynamics because Ken went from being sort of on the outs of the social dynamics, which Charlotte was hinting at the beginning of the episode, to all of a sudden sort of swooping in and taking up my allies that I had been working with since the very first game. Like me, Allison, Bex, and Bedalia were the 4 people in the minority with Paul from day one. And it all kind of sort of happened. And I'm sure that the groundwork was being laid for that, like in advance of this episode, but I hadn't really seen it. And I think part of that was me taking Allison and Bedalia for granted. Part of it was me picking a fight with Bex and driving a wedge between us there. And the way that she was playing the game was not the way that I was wanting to play. But yeah, I think Ken's perspective on this is that he just had a plan for 4 people and picked people that he trusted. I still wonder how much of this was actual gameplay rather than like, I think there was more strategy and gameplay involved here in terms of how the groups were formed. But it's hard. Like, I don't actually know. According to Charlotte's Twitch stream last night that Ken was on, so Ken was saying that Allison and Bex basically said, we don't want to work with Ben. And so that's why Ken was sort of the bad guy who spoke up and said, no, we've got our group of 4. So that's quite interesting. Like, I knew that Bex obviously wouldn't want to work with me. I was surprised to hear that about Allison. And I still don't know where that was coming from. Like, I don't know if Allison was hesitant to work with me because I had this conflict with Bex, or if it was because of how I had been playing the games. I don't know. I don't know if it was because she was, thought I was a strong player. I don't think it's that because Ken is also a really strong player and she was happy to work with Ken. I tried to ask Allison once about this and didn't really get that straightforward of an answer. So it's really interesting. Like it's hard to know exactly what was going through people's minds at this time. But what I was really concerned about was being alone, because if I was working on my own, there was a chance that both groups could team up, share all of their information about what chips they have, and then try to put both of my animals in last place. And they could they could all agree that no matter who won out of the 6 of them, they would put me in last, make me the deathmatch candidate, and then I would choose somebody. And that was a real possibility. And the fact that I had been left out of both groups made me think that that possibility was more likely than I would have thought it was, like, going into the episode. So that's one reason why I really tried to get in with Charlotte and Indy. And, eventually they let me join them. I actually think I've been thinking all along that our strategy was actually a dumb strategy to all pick Giraffe. But actually, I'm now convinced, like watching the episode back, that it wasn't actually that terrible of a strategy. I think we just executed it really poorly. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But yeah, they didn't show it in the episode, but Bedalia kept coming to talk to us, and he was revealing a lot of information about the other team. And that is why Charlotte ended up picking the Lion, because Bedalia was really confident that that team was going to push him to the win. And Charlotte was clever enough to recognize that if Bedalia was going to win, then she should pick one of his animals. I picked one that the other team was probably going to be picking, but not one of Bedalia's. And I think so you see in the episode, Charlotte was feeling really guilty about not helping Indy. And I think what she was alluding to is that she could have told Indy to pick the elephant so that they both had something that Bedalia had. But I think Charlotte either hadn't thought of that or maybe was prioritizing her own survival, which is perfectly reasonable. But I think she felt really guilty, basically, that Indy was tied with me for last, when there's a chance that if Indy picks elephant, it's possible that I'm in last, like on my own. But it's hard to say, right? Because if there's one fewer elephant in the box, then it's harder to pull and move the elephant chip. So I don't know. It's hard to know. Okay, so the main match starts. And this is where we make our first mistake. So Charlotte doesn't abstain in round 1. And I didn't remember this. And I'm not sure why we didn't have Charlotte abstain. The only thing I can think of is that, like, I thought that the order of pulling the chips was going to stay the same each round. But actually what happened is that when Charlotte didn't abstain in round 1 and then Allison did, Charlotte moved to the end. And then Allison went to the end after her. But I think we thought that Charlotte would still stay first in the order. So, or maybe what happened is we knew that Charlotte was going to go to the end. So we were hoping that maybe Ken's team wouldn't abstain and Charlotte would get to the end anyway and still be able to pull chips. Or it was just a mistake. Like, I honestly can't remember, but this was definitely the first mistake, because had Charlotte abstained there, we would have had an extra round of pulling the chips last, and we could have had a better chance of moving the Giraffe. Our draws were a little bit unlucky. It felt like we could never pull giraffes. Like, in the whole game, it just felt like we were never pulling the giraffe tiles. But obviously, we also made mistakes, because there was a chance to move the giraffe on my turn, and me and Charlotte and Indy didn't see that, and that was obviously a big mistake. Had we done that, the elephant or the lion would not have moved 3, and the giraffe would have moved 3. And if Charlotte had abstained, then Charlotte would also be pulling chips like an extra round. So I actually think it's possible, looking at it now, because me, Charlotte, and Indy would have only had to focus on the giraffe. As long as we can get the giraffe in the top 3, there's a 2/3 chance that someone on the team of 4 ends up with 0 points. And what I mean by that is, like, if the giraffe is in the top 3, then there's only 2 other animals that can also be in the top 3. So, for example, I've worked out the possibilities. If it's the zebra and the crocodile that are also in the top 3, Bedalia doesn't have either of those. So he gets 0 points and he's last place. So if it's giraffe, zebra, and crocodile in any order in the top 3, Bedalia is last and he's going to the death match. If it's zebra and lion and giraffe, then Allison's in the death match. If it's crocodile, elephant, and giraffe, then Bex is in the death match. And if it's elephant, lion, and giraffe, then Ken is in the death match. There's only 2 combinations out of the 6 that everyone in that 4-person group had one of those animals, and that's zebra, elephant. So everyone had either a zebra or an elephant, and also everyone had either a crocodile or a lion. So me, Charlotte, and Indy wouldn't necessarily have known which combination to go for, but just by chance, it's possible that we could have ended up with a top three group of animals where one of those four was in last place and definitely going into the death match. So looking back on it, I actually think that our strategy wasn't that bad. And I think had we been moving the giraffe and they realized that the giraffe was going to be in the top three and that we all had it, they would have started to panic about which other two animals were in the top three. Now, they probably would have been pushing for either the zebra and elephant together or the crocodile and the lion together so that they would at least get some points. But again, that means that even if they do that, if we could get the giraffe into second place, then we still get more points than one of them. So yeah, there's a lot of different combinations. And I think ultimately we didn't play the match very well. Like we could have played it a lot better and it could have potentially been a lot more interesting and come down to the wire because at the end, we ended up supporting the lion just to kind of end the game. And I was happy for Bedalia to win because I felt confident he wouldn't pick me for the death match. But we would not have accelerated that game had there been a chance to push the giraffe and try to avoid last. So yeah, I could see that the dynamics of this whole thing weren't good for me. And so you could see me throughout the game trying to pull Bedalia aside and trying to influence him not to be so tight with Ken. I actually didn't think that the strategy for the group of four really made a lot of sense. It made a lot of sense for Bedalia and Bex because the goal was to give them the tokens of life. But the strategy only makes sense for Ken and Allison if they don't think they're going to be called into the death match. And I think Ken feeling comfortable that he wouldn't get called in. But I was surprised that Allison was feeling so comfortable with this plan. And I'm not sure why she was happy to go along with it, knowing that there was a really high probability that either me or Indy was going to pick her for the death match. So I think had people been playing with a bit more self-interest, this group of four strategy wouldn't have been as effective. It was only effective because you had people who were willing to do it without guarantee of safety from the death match. I was also trying to influence Bedalia not to save Bex with the token because obviously I knew that if me or Indy were going into the death match, it was better for our side to be able to challenge Bex. What they didn't show is I was trying to convince Bedalia that Bex was not a good ally moving forward, even if he trusted her. And that was because she wasn't reliable in the games. So in the lights out game, she couldn't remember like her cubes. So I was trying to tell Bedalia, like, even if you trust Bex, like she's not a reliable person to play the game with because her information might not be correct. And she's obviously running around like sharing it with everyone else. So, you know, she supposedly had Amanfi's back, but then Amanfi left and there wasn't really that much of a fight to save him. So yeah, I was trying anything I could from this like social strategy perspective to try to weaken those bonds because I knew that I was going to be in trouble moving forward if that group of four stuck together to the end, like even if I could survive this episode. Right before I made the mistake, they showed Charlotte say, "We need the giraffe to move as well," which was weird. Like it sort of implied that Charlotte saw that I could move the giraffe on my turn, but none of us did. Which was a huge mistake. And that didn't feel good. Like, it doesn't feel good. I've sort of been getting used to the fact that I'm coming across badly in the show, like a villain, and I'm playing a bit mean and vindictive. Like, that's all fine. But to look dumb as well, that really got me because I feel like so far I've actually come across looking very smart, like maybe a bit evil, but I'll take evil and smart. But evil and dumb is not a good combination. So yeah, not a good episode for me. I loved seeing how paranoid Bex kept getting when Bedalia was talking to us. And it made me laugh because thus far in the game, it was basically Bex not understanding why I was so paranoid that she was running off and talking to people. Well, this episode was a bit like a taste of her own medicine because Bedalia was running around and then she was suspicious that he was flipping. So I really enjoyed watching her like panic, like being paranoid, watching Bedalia run around. I do want to address the comment I made to Bedalia where I said about Bex, why would you help her? She's done nothing. Obviously, I think that's a really harsh comment. And I messaged Bex last night and apologized because I don't agree with that comment now. So having watched the show back, I don't agree with that. I think that Bex has played a socially strategic game. She has had a strategy of trying to get in good with everyone and build those bonds and trying to get the token of life however she can each game. And it's been largely successful. So to say that she's done nothing is very unfair and not a true characterization of her skills and talents in the game. I will say that at the time that we were doing this, I was more talking about the strategy side of things and coming up with what to do in the games. And I did feel that that there were some people in the game, Bex being one of them, who were sort of happy to go along with other people's strategies and do what they were told. And that's more what I was referring to. But I also do think that at this point in the game, I didn't really see or respect the game that Bex was playing. And now, having looked back at it, I do. And I also didn't really respect Bex as much of a player at this point in the game, but I do have more respect for her as a player now, because Bex is actually one of the best social players. And I think she has social skills. I've said it before in my recaps. Bex has social skills and instinct that I wish I had. And if I had just an ounce of what she has in that area, I think I would be a lot more successful in my life and in my relationships. So yeah, I definitely think that saying that she's done nothing was not fair. And I don't stand by that comment now. So Ken mentions at one point that I'm avoiding the deathmatch like the plague. Hell yeah, I am. I'm avoiding the deathmatch like the plague. You got me. Because guess what? I didn't want to get taken out the way Amalfi did. And after we saw a social deathmatch in episode 4, I definitely don't want to go in a deathmatch. Some of the death matches are more skill-based, and I would say that Hidden Knots and Crosses and Same or Different are very skill-based. Some of them are a little bit more luck-based, and I actually think that Black and White from this episode is the most luck-based, because I think there's more skill in Poker Face than there is in Black and White. Obviously, the rock, paper, scissors that Amalfi got was complete crap. Like, there's no skill or luck to that at all. Like, it's sort of everyone else deciding. But I obviously didn't want to go into the deathmatch because you never know what can happen. And the only way to guarantee you make it further in the game is to survive. And I knew that from my preparation, if I could make it to the end, that I would have a decent chance of winning because I've practiced a lot of these death matches. But I don't want to test that theory by going into early death matches. Like, I'm trying to avoid it as much as I can. I was really glad to see that Indy had a moment where she pulled Bedalia aside and said, if you win, please don't pick me for last place. I had been feeling really guilty that I was lobbying Bedalia to pick Indy for last place and that she hadn't done that to me. So I was really glad to see that she did and that she was playing the game hard. It made me feel a bit less guilty. I think ultimately what it boiled down to was that people perceived Charlotte and Indy together as a bigger threat than me on my own. And that's because they were attached at the hip. And I think they didn't really make as much of an effort, maybe as they could have, to build relationships with the other contestants. Whereas you could argue that I did make a lot of effort to build relationships with the other contestants. And I may have abused and broken some of those bonds at different points because I needed to advance in the games. But there was something there. There was some effort that was made and some connection. Whereas I think Charlotte and Indy were a little bit out on their own. And I think people were threatened by how tight the two of them were together. Towards the end of the game, Indy got upset because she realized that we were going to be in last place and that she was probably going to get picked. And it was a really sad moment because she started crying. And I, of course, felt really bad. But I obviously wanted her to get picked because I didn't want to get picked. And at one point, Indy was like, I just want my vape. It was so relatable. She just wanted something to comfort her in that moment. I wish they would have kept that in. It was really funny, actually, but also really sad. I also wanted to talk about this comment that Charlotte made about Ken sort of swooping up the more naive players. And then, of course, they stitched Charlotte up in the editing by showing Ken immediately after that saying, oh, it's really insulting to these guys to call them naive. And Ken says, everyone's playing a great game. I have thoughts on this, and I don't want to have beef with anyone in the cast, but I do agree with what Charlotte is saying, and I felt the same way. But I don't think it's this huge insult the way that Ken was saying. I think that people approached the game differently. There were people who approached the game in a very strategic way. And I think that would be like me and Charlotte, where the relationships that we had with people were more strategic relationships and alliances. And then I think there were people who prioritized building genuine, like, social bonds and connections based on honesty. And I do think that approach to the game is a little bit naive. For example, Bedalia got really upset when Amanfi was lying to him. I do think that is being a little bit naive, because the way that you are meant to play this game, in my opinion, is by manipulating and deceiving, because sometimes we are put into roles in these games where you have to do that. So if you are going to hold a grudge against somebody because they did that or because they lied, and take it personally, I do think that that's a little bit naive. But I don't think that that's a wrong way to play. Like, I think playing more based on social connections and playing a bit less of a cutthroat, aggressive, strategic game is still a valid way to play. If everyone played the way that, like, me and Scott and Charlotte would play, the show would be very boring. And if everyone played the way that Bedalia and Allison were playing, the show would be really boring. So it takes all types. But I don't think it's fair to sort of characterize what Charlotte said as this huge insult. Like, I think she's just pointing out that some people are more accepting of different behavior in the game than others. So yeah, I don't want to offend anyone, but I was also seeing a similar breakdown in the teams, in the players. I think there's also an interesting question to think about: what are people's motivations for playing, and why are people there? And I think it's something that we'll talk about a bit more next week. But yeah, like, I can just speak from my perspective that I was there playing with my heart on my sleeve. And obviously you can tell I wasn't really concerned about what people were going to think of me at the end of the day. And maybe I should have been, because actually it turns out I'm more sensitive and I care more about what people think about me than I thought I would. And given that I do care, maybe I shouldn't have played the way I played. But that's me. Like, I was there to play hard, to play the game, to be strategic, to be aggressive. And I think Charlotte was too. Like, I think we weren't necessarily going to sugarcoat things, and we were always going to tell our honest truths in our confessionals. Now, it's possible that those change, and I think Charlotte talked about this in her Twitch. Like, she did some of those confessionals thinking one thing, and then she would have conversations with people, and it would change the way she felt about people. But of course, when the show shows it, it makes it look like what you say in that confessional is what you think and feel all the time, which isn't necessarily true. Okay, going into the death match. So I did not know until a couple weeks ago that Charlotte told Indy to pick me. My assumption would have been that Indy was leaning towards picking me, but then Charlotte told her, no, you should pick Allison. And actually it was the other way around. So that was really interesting. When Indy came out from her conversation with Charlotte, they cut out a part where I said to Indy, I could tell that she was thinking about picking me. And I was like, look, Indy, if you go into this death match and win, you want to have allies to work with you when you come back into the game. If you pick me and we go into the death match together, if you win and send me home, you're going to come back and it's going to be you and Charlotte against all of them. And you're still going to be outnumbered. Whereas if you pick Allison and you send her home, I will work with you. And it will be me, you, and Charlotte moving forward, and we'll be even 3-3 or 3-2, or no, 3-3 against the other team. And I think I felt bad about saying that, because in a way it was sort of, I was negotiating for myself to keep myself out of the game, but in a way I was making it more likely she would pick Allison. So it felt a bit like going against Allison. But at the same time, I got left out of that group. And now, finding out that Allison didn't want to work with me that day, I feel a little bit less guilty about it. Like, we're there to play the game. And I think ultimately my ability to negotiate in this episode is what kept me out of the death match, because I relied on the bond that I had with Bedalia to keep me safe. And then I relied on the bond with Indy to keep me safe. So I think the choices that I made in the previous episodes benefited me here, because I gave Bedalia the token of life in episode 3 instead of Charlotte. And I think that really saved me here. Had I not given Bedalia that token, he absolutely puts me in the deathmatch here. And in the last episode, I traded a red cube to help Indy win. So even though Indy was annoyed at my codebreaker strategy, I helped her win the last episode and told her I was going to work with her. And that was enough to convince her to keep me. So yeah, I think there is some, going back to the stuff at the beginning of the recap, like I think there's some truth to me collecting enemies like Infinity Stones. Like the way I played the game was not everyone was really wanting to work with me, but at the same time, I still had enough social capital, and I was building enough bond and enough of a bond and a relationship with people that I was able to stay safe. So yeah, I was really pleased actually that I was able to make it through this episode without the deathmatch. Would I have picked Ken? If Bedalia made me last place, I don't think I would have picked Ken, but I was trying to convince Ken that I was going to come after him because I didn't like Ken's strategy of trying to keep Bedalia and Beck safe. And I knew that moving forward, it was going to be really dangerous if he kept playing that way. Because the people who Charlotte and I would want to challenge in the deathmatch would be Bex or Bedalia. And if they're safe, we can't pick them anymore. So I definitely wanted to try to shake Ken up a bit and try to stop him from just keeping them safe the whole time. They showed at one point where I was like, oh, I'm not happy about how the game was played today. And I think what they showed in the program makes it, I look really hypocritical, right? Because my whole strategy in these games has been to get an alliance together, come up with my strategy, execute that strategy, and if it isolates or targets other players, I don't give a shit. So it looks really hypocritical for me to then be on the receiving end of that and be like, oh, I'm so sad. I don't like the way the game went. I get that. The reason I said that was because after episode 3, Ken came back from the deathmatch and he was saying, I didn't like the way that Codebreakers was played. Like it wasn't fun to be targeted that way. And people were really sympathetic to that. And I think that's one of the reasons why people then wanted to work with him moving forward. And so I saw that happen and I thought, okay, I need to try to take advantage of that and do something similar here. So what I was trying to do was twofold. I think I was trying to let people feel a bit guilty about the fact that no one wanted me on their team so that maybe they would feel a bit sympathetic for me moving forward and wouldn't ice me out again. I also wanted Ken to know that he was on my radar because I didn't want him to think he had this free pass to the final and that no one was ever going to challenge him. I think the way it ended up coming across, though, was not in this like sympathetic way, like feel sorry for me that I got left out. I was coming in too hot, and instead it came across, way more like aggressive than I was intending it for. And I honestly can't remember how much of that is due to the editing. Like maybe I did say something like, oh yeah, it didn't feel good being left out of both of the teams today. If I said something like that and they left it out of the edit, then their purpose in making it look a lot more aggressive than it sounded in real life. But if I never said that, then of course it's going to, come across me being a sore loser and hypocritical, and that's fine. So yeah, all of those criticisms of me in that moment I think are fair, but just keep in mind that part of that was strategy and trying to position myself in the game moving forward so that that other side didn't just keep steamrolling me and Charlotte if Indy if Indy lost the game. Yeah, it was really interesting that Indy didn't pick me. And one of the things I've wondered is maybe she didn't pick me because in the second episode when Allison played Noughts and Crosses with Scott, Indy was one of the only other people in the study when I was sort of helping Allison with that deathmatch. So maybe she saw like, oh, Ben recognized the strategy of hidden Noughts and Crosses really quickly and helped Allison. So maybe that was part of what was going on in her mind as well, because obviously Charlotte felt like I was going to crumble under the pressure. But maybe Indy also saw that side, that I was good at strategizing for the death matches. I don't know. I did practice this death match a lot. I played Black and White in the weeks leading up to filming with a bunch of my friends, because for me, it's a quintessential death match from Genius Game. And I was sure that they would have it at some point. And so I tried to play with as many people as possible so that I could try to figure out like what strategies people were likely to use, if they were more likely to play a lower number in the beginning or a middle number or a high number. The deathmatch was really intense. So Allison obviously did a really good job. She had her deathmatch stare again and was quite intimidating. I think she got in Indy's head, and I think Indy got a bit nervous. Like, had she followed the plan that we had come up with, she would have won that first round, because we said that if Allison played a black, that she should play her 5. And then she would know whether Allison had played a 1 or no, she would know whether Allison played a 0, 2, or 4, or if she played a 6 or an 8. But we thought that if Allison played a black, it was likely her 4. And if Indy played her 5, then she was beating it by just 1 point, which is what you want to do. But that being said, Indy played a really great game. Had she played her last tiles in a different order, it would have been a tie and they would have gone again. And then maybe she, calms down a bit and is able to focus a bit better. But yeah, I was trying to pump her up for the death match as much as I could. And I was saying, like, you're really comfortable and you feel confident at a poker table. So just channel that energy in this task. But yeah, obviously Allison played a great game. Indy also played a great game. She was a really good player. And I think she's not been featured all that much in the edit, which is unfortunate. But Indy was really clever and really smart. And she's the only other person who's won 2 main matches so far. So I think, yeah, it's a shame that she's gotten eliminated here, because I think she was a really good player. So I've hit on some of these things. So some of the surprises from the episode was the mistake with the giraffe. So since we filmed, I had been told, I think by Ken, that we had made a mistake at some point where we could have moved the giraffe. But I didn't know how that played out or what he meant by that. So seeing it all play out was not fun. It was also interesting seeing Bex's paranoia about Bedalia going with the other group, like a little bit of a taste of her own medicine. So I appreciated seeing that. Also, Charlotte asking Indy or telling India that she should pick me for the death match was really interesting. That was a bit of a surprise. I only found that out a few weeks ago. Yeah, and also the fact that Bex and Allison, I guess, didn't want to work with me in that game was a bit of a surprise, especially Allison. They didn't show, I mentioned, like, negotiating with Indy to stay out the death match, although I think it kind of makes me look better that they didn't show that, so thanks. Yeah, they left out the trick with the zebra chip, which makes all of us look dumb for not finding it, so I'm glad they left that out. Also, they left out Bedalia coming to tell me and Indy and Charlotte what the other team was doing, and that really did help us with our strategy, so it was interesting that they didn't show him playing both sides. Okay, quickly I'm going to go through Pyramid. I've put me and Indy at the bottom. Like, I think this was a terrible episode for me. The only thing that would have been worse is going home, so that's why Indy's below me. But honestly, I think I played the worst episode out of anyone, because I missed the mistake. We didn't get Charlotte to abstain. No one wanted to work with me in the teams. Then afterwards, when I'm trying to gain sympathy from people, I just end up making people more mad at me. So yeah, total meltdown on my part. Not really the best game for me. That being said, I was able to use my persuasion skills to stay out the death match. And I think that given how the game has gone and how much of a grudge people have been holding against the strong players who have been playing aggressively, the fact that I've made it 5 episodes without seeing a death match, I'm honestly really proud of. Like, I think that required a lot more skill than, perhaps I'll get credit for, which is fine. I put Allison next only because I don't see how Allison benefits from the strategy of the majority group. It seems to me that there's a very, very, very good chance that Allison is in the death match by going with their strategy. And I'm not sure why it's worth taking that risk. I put Charlotte above Allison only because Charlotte was clever enough to pick one of Bedalia's animals. Like, that was a really clever move, and it kept her out of the death match. Charlotte also, like me, was seeing what was going on with the social dynamics. And I think she realized that Ken had sort of taken these other players under his wing and was working with them. And she had the forethought to try to team up with Ken as well. So everybody wanted to work with Ken this game. And I think the only reason she settled for me was because Ken turned her down. So I put Bex next because she did a good job making sure that she got a token and being safe from the elimination. So that was good. But ultimately, Bedalia, Bex, and Allison were just going along with Ken's strategy, and it was to their benefit. But that's why I've put Ken at the top, because it was Ken's strategy. He put the group together. So this was like, in my mind, it was sort of like Ken's zombie game, where I got the bubble together and had a group of 4 that all won. Ken basically did the same thing here. So it really showed his strategic prowess, but also his ability socially to pull in the allies that he needed. Therefore, my queen of the episode is Ken. So I think Ken played a really great game this episode. He played a great game last episode as well. So, wrapping up, going into episode 6, I'm feeling like I'm in trouble because obviously that group of 4 wasn't really feeling me. And also now Indy, who I at least had some kind of relationship with, she saved me from the death match. She's gone. So I think it would have been a lot better had it been 3-3 going into this next game. But now, from my mind, it's me and Charlotte against the world. Now, it's unclear what's going to happen with me and Charlotte, because Charlotte is potentially still holding a grudge because I didn't give her the token of life in episode 3. So we're going to see. Like, obviously, me giving Bedalia that token is probably what kept me safe in episode 5. But is Charlotte going to actually want to work with me moving forward? So we'll have to see. Next episode is going to be really interesting. Okay. That's all for episode 5 recap. Thank you guys so much for watching. Yeah, it's been really an interesting experience going through all of this. I think with this video, we should hit 10,000 views across like all the videos together, which is insane. Like, I never would have thought that in making these things that many people would watch them. So I'm glad that you guys are enjoying them, that it's giving a bit of context to what's going on in the game. And I'm really excited actually to film this reunion with all the people in the cast. So if you have your comments and questions for that, please comment them, and I'll keep track of ones that I want to ask people when we do this little reunion. I think it'll be really nice to get other people's perspectives of what they were thinking at various points in the game. And also keep checking out Charlotte's Twitch stream. So I was on there last week. Ken was on there this week. I think next week she's going to try to watch episode 6 with Amanfi. And the videos are saved on her Twitch. So her Twitch is twitch.tv/Mikichar, Mikichar. Yeah, so you can get some great insight from her and Ken this episode as well. Cool. Thanks very much. I hope everyone has a great week, and I will see you next week.